So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to share our third session in the series, but our first session on case making for equitable and inclusive digital learning at scale with you. Today's session will be interactive, where we work to connect vital data and strategies with your experiences at your institutions. We encourage you to respond to questions and make comments in the chat. But to help keep us on track with our discussions and keep us on time, we also have a parking lot for today's meetings for thoughts, questions, and comments that can be responded to at a later time. The link to the parking lot Padlet, it will be put into the chat for you. We will be working together over the course of this series and discussing important and challenging ideas to help you make a strong case within your institution. So it's vital to build a community so that we can do this work well. If you are able, we encourage you to turn on your camera to join us. So to get everything started, I am going to turn it over to our facilitators for today's session, Dr. Rwanda Garth McCullough and Dr. H. Ray Keith. And it is all yours.
Thank you so much, Norma, and welcome everyone. We would love to see who is in this space with us today. So as Ray and I tell you a little bit more about ourselves, we encourage you to do the same. If you are able, please type into the chat and share your title, your preferred pronouns, and your institution, and where in the country you are joining us from. And if you can also add for today how you would describe your experience with equity work in education. How experienced are you? Where are you on in this journey? So thank you, Theo, for getting us started. So I've introduced myself a couple of times, but I'm going to go a little deeper today. Good to learn more about me. As Norma mentioned, I'm Dr. Rwanda Garth McCullough, the Director of Program Development at Achieving the Dream. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm dialing in here from Falls Church, Virginia. But I've been in Falls Church for about 6 years, spent 21 years of my life in Chicago, Illinois, where I was faculty at Loyola University Chicago in the School of Education. And I was in the curriculum and instruction department, working on my research and my teaching that was centered on culture responsive teaching and learning. My dissertation topic was the effect of culturally bound prior knowledge on African American students' reading comprehension. And I have been involved in equity work, really, if I think about it, really since childhood. This relates to the fun fact about me. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was raised in the Quaker community. And as some of you may be aware of, Quakers take the imperative to make this world better through social justice and peace and human rights very seriously. And so I grew up with weekly community potlucks. I thought everyone did. For a long time. I was like, that everyone lives like that. And, going to protests and boycotting. I remember one of the hardest boycotts where we boycotted Nestle chocolate. And so for a child, that was pretty intense. But it developed definitely developed my sense of sacrifice to take a stand and for to speak for the voiceless, because they had done some shifty work on a baby formula and that affected many African villages. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm just thrilled to be here today talking about this work that I have so much passion for, and being joined by one of my great colleagues, H. Ray Keith, who will now introduce himself.
Good afternoon, I believe. It might be good morning for some folks still. I'm Ray Keith. I am a program development consultant at Achieving the Dream. Prior to that, I was a former Associate Dean of Instructional Intervention and Support at the Community College of Aurora in Aurora, Colorado. And that's where I'm coming from today, which is right outside the Denver Metroplex. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I've been a DEI champion as much as Rwanda said most of my life. Spent my career really focused on serving historically marginalized communities and students, creating spaces where they could thrive and be their authentic selves. I also was part of our inclusive excellence leadership team at the college, and so was able to actually develop that as an institutional effort, helped with the strategic plan, and then led DEI work at the college for over 7 years. In my previous career, I was a high school administrator working again with underserved student populations. And a fun fact is I got to go swimming in the Indian Ocean when I spent 2 months in Africa, in Kenya. And so really excited about being able to be here with you all today and look forward to us learning and growing together. And so as we engage as a community of learners, we would like to make sure that we begin to center and revisit our community norms. And so over the last 2 sessions, we've shared these community norms. And so I would ask you just to take a look at these norms. It's really important that we set community norms, especially when we're discussing issues of equity, power, and justice. And so we want to make sure that we're creating a space where everyone can engage authentically, where folks' voices are being heard, and that we can learn from one another in ways that are meaningful, but also using these norms in a way that it helps us in the way we engage in this space. So we invite you to embrace these interactive moments and to consider embedding these types of discussions and structures in your own practices and at your own institutions. And throughout this session, we'll be modeling inclusive and equity-minded practices that you can incorporate at your institution. And community agreements are one of those modeling moments here. And so again, we hope you take this back to your institution as you have department meetings. This is something you can actually incorporate into your classroom practices as well. So we'll be using technology today, and we want to make sure that we're here to support you as you participate in the session. If you're having challenges with your technology, please let us know. Today we'll be using a webcam, breakout rooms, chat, and old-fashioned pen and paper for those who want to do that. And we'll also, as we engage in these different technology tools, we'll be giving you directions so that you can use those effectively. But if you are having challenges, please feel free to let us know, and you can use the chat to do that. And as Norma said, we'll be using chat to ask questions, share thoughts and ideas during the session. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rwanda.
Thank you, Ray. Now we'll take a look at the trajectory for our session. So today we are laying the groundwork for why equity in teaching and learning matters, why it's important to our work as student-centered educators, and how we can cultivate support for equity-based initiatives at our respective institutions. So the objectives for this session, we will be discussing how inclusive teaching practices can include equitable digital learning. And we will also explore the differences between equity, inclusion, and access, and how they each connect with digital learning. So our goal here today is to equip everyone to at least have enough information to be dangerous. and for the good. Our focus in these case-making sessions is giving really to give you enough information to feel ready to take action and to advocate for a focus on equity in your institutional digital learning strategy. And I can tell from the introductions in the chat that, and thank you for sharing your experiences and where you are in the journey. I can tell many of you are far along on this journey, and some of us may be just starting out, but there's, it takes all of us. It takes all of us to move the needle. So we welcome all the different perspectives, and please, this is a time to ask the questions, and it's a safe space to ask questions you may not feel comfortable asking in other spaces, because if we don't ask the questions that we don't know, then it makes it impossible to really do this work effectively and to do our best to serve students. So Ray will provide an overview of today's session and set the context for this work.
So our time together today will focus on case making. This is the first step in a process. And in future sessions, we'll dive deep into implementation, iteration, and scaling. But first, we'll need to understand the why. Why are we doing this work? And then how we're going to be able to get folks on board. And we'll be providing you tools to be able to have those conversations and to, again, take this back to your institution so that you can scale this work within your colleges and with your colleagues. Today, we'll focus on the first two topics: why educational equity, value and differences in equity, inclusion, and access. By the end of the next two sessions, you'll be able to make a case for evidence-based teaching practices and digital learning tools at your institution. We're going to equip you with data, case studies, practical strategies so that you can get others on board at your institution to move this work forward. And as we get started, please, again, feel free to use the chat for any questions or conversations that you want to engage in. So today we'll focus on case making that builds institutional capacity to serve BIPOC, poverty-affected, and first-generation students while using equity-minded digital tools and technology to improve student outcomes and student success. And as we consider the challenge, we must be mindful that Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and poverty-affected students' first exposure to college-level academic work are in these introductory level courses. When we think about these courses, unfortunately, the curriculum and instruction used in gateway courses reflect educational practices designed for majority white, male, and neurotypical students from middle class and upper class backgrounds. If we don't examine these practices, these approaches can create barriers for minoritized students and reinforce inequities within higher education institutions. So we're going to explore equitable digital learning as a solution. And when we scale this solution, this approach can improve student outcomes while supporting academic leaders, faculty, and instructional support staff in making inclusive course design and curriculum, culturally responsive curriculum, teaching practices, and making that actionable at their institutions. So as we engage in this work, it's so important to leverage the student voice. I often say in higher education, we make decisions for students without asking them. And so it's really important as we're engaging in this work that we are elevating the student's voice and that we're incorporating the student's voice and perspective in the work that we're doing to close equity gaps. And so we're going to watch a video that will set the stage for elevating student voices.
I am a daughter.
I am a son.
A brother.
A sister.
I am ambitious.
I am resilient.
I am determined.
I am driven.
And I decided to go to college to write a better story.
For my family.
For my community.
For my future.
But as a person of color,
Someone who's economically disadvantaged.
Someone from a rural community.
Someone who doesn't see more people like me in my field.
Finishing my degree is harder.
because college was not designed for people like me.
But I still deserve a high-quality education.
With opportunity, the right resources, and classes designed with me in mind.
I will graduate.
I will be successful.
I will achieve everything I am capable of.
Now's the time for us to change higher education together.
It's time to use new and emerging technology
To create learning opportunities that meet my needs.
This is the equity equation in higher education.
Effective implementation of digital learning strategies with a focus on equity is a major factor in the delivery of a high-quality teaching and learning experience that is accessible, adaptive, and equitable for all students. The sum of our efforts is greater than our individual parts. Today is the day that you do your part. Be a part of the equity equation.
So in that video, Dr. Jessica Rowland Williams offered an important challenge for each of us. Let's think about how we can each be a part of the equity equation for our students. We will be sending you to breakout rooms to discuss what would it look like if equity was embedded in your work. You'll have 7 minutes And you'll be asked when when you're asked to when you return, you'll be asked to share out. So please be prepared. And if you haven't met everyone in the group, please introduce yourself and then each take a minute or two to discuss how you envision your responsibility and focus in equity work. And thank you, Patty, for placing the question in the chat. See you soon. Hi, Dr. Mo. Good to see you again.
Hi, Rhonda. It's great to be here. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
Wonderful.
All righty. It looks like we are all back. I know that was quick. I hope you were able to have some good conversation. And I'm interested to know, what visions did you hear that gave you some new ideas? Anything you found interesting from the conversation? Feel free to unmute and share out. Or place.
Because I held forth so long, and Brad and I were just having so much fun talking about our particular locations. I'm not sure we resolved much of anything, but I can tell you that the taking the digital approach is a particular challenge when you have so many students who their only introduction to technology is their cell phone. That's a real challenge, and getting them to even use that and bring that to the classroom is something that I'm dealing with on a daily basis.
Son.
A brother.
Yeah.
A
It
sister.
definitely takes time in that we probably don't think when we think about, these students as digital natives. But I know my own child, she went to college, and she had mastered Google Docs and PowerPoint and social media. And that, a lot of the information systems that she needed for her classes, she had to learn. They don't, many don't have that. They're graduating from high school without that computer literacy at the level to come into intro courses and be able to, edit, revise, comment. And at her institution, she attends an HBCU, they had a computer literacy placement exam that she did not pass, and it placed her in a computer science course, which, it was that happy mommy moment where I told you so. You have to learn. You can't avoid the office suite. You can't avoid it. So getting them up to speed where we just want to jump in and start teaching, and they're still struggling with many of the basic computing concepts. We have to create space and time in the courses and in our pathways to build those capacities. I definitely agree, David. Any other interesting insights that came up from the breakout, Sheila?
Yeah, I'm at Lehman College. Actually, one of my colleagues was there, and we talked about all the opportunities we provide for the students at a university level, which is a learning center, tutorials, remedial help for the students. But personally, in my class, which I teach a writing class, it's for juniors and seniors. You're talking about technology. I provide a really big lesson. It's all done online, but what I find, students think they know about technology and they know very little. One of the first lessons I provide is one on searching the internet. The students only know about Google. There must be 30 other search tools, academic search tools, business search tools, and so on and so forth. And to be honest with you, I've been teaching the same lesson with the same handouts for 30 years, and it is brand new to all the students, and they are so appreciative. And I said, oh, I didn't know about, these others. So, I integrate technology, but I do everything in a very slow, small, step by step to get them up to where they should be, something they didn't come to my class with.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And that when you think about approaching teaching from the equity-minded perspective, that assessment of prior knowledge, I think is key because, and it's, I know I researched the effect of prior knowledge, but when you go to teach college level classes, again, it's not in the textbooks. It's not in, it's not in many of the faculty guides to just get a baseline assessment of where students are. And I think one positive aspect of digital learning and courseware is some of that prior knowledge assessment is built in, so you can see where are they, what do they know, and you'll get a sense of where you can where you need to slow down, where you need to revisit, and where you can speed up because they maybe have had this some of the concepts, and then none of the others that you would assume that they would have had. And so especially in introductory courses where they're coming from different preparatory experiences, it's really important to get that baseline. And I say assess prior knowledge early and often and in a low stakes way. And we'll talk more about that throughout, but that's just another plug for how to use digital learning to address inequities that we all face in our classrooms, and to make sure we're serving our students. So thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sheila, I appreciate your approach to scaffolding also. Really building those steps for students instead of giving them the whole package, but scaffolding your assignments and your approach to helping them learn those tools. And then real quick, go ahead.
I just want one more sentence. I also provide the opportunity to redo their assignments 1, 2, 3, 4 times, whatever it takes until they get it right. It's not about a grade in my class. It's about learning. So
right. Thanks. And Heather, you had a comment. Would you put that in the chat for us? Do you mind?
Well, we have time. We have time, Heather.
Okay, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, we were just, we didn't talk as much about the technology side of it, but we were talking about the biases that most academic standards are usually white middle class standards. And so students of color, I teach mostly writing, so I was thinking it from a linguistic perspective, that students of color come in with very different linguistic skills a lot of times, and we're expecting them to have white middle class linguistic skills. And if they don't, then we're trying to get them to those white middle class standards. And my point was, we shouldn't make them have to be white and middle class. They're not white and middle class. And I don't feel like it's right for me to require them or force them to try to become like a white middle class person when they are not a white middle class person. And so those ideas that there's a lot of bias involved in just our standards. Our standards are often white middle class standards, and we have to be aware of that when we've got a diverse classroom.
Thank you for that, Heather. I think that's really important to amplify that. And I think the opportunities, when you can create opportunities, it sounds like you do, to affirm and strengthen the linguistic skills that the students do bring into the class. You talk about, for example, Black English vernacular. There's a lot of strength and history and that's tied to students' identity. And a lot of our messaging in education is that's not good writing. That's not good talk. That's not good speech patterns. And then what we would inevitably message to the students is, you're not right. You're not good enough. You're not, meeting these standards that we've set that are definitely, have so much bias and oppression baked into them. And so, and I know it's a dance, especially for our writing faculty. You want to teach them the standards so they can, operate in our society. But I think to do that in a way that doesn't denounce what the language that students do bring. And I think we do a special disservice to multi-language learners. You know, it's like as Americans, we fight to learn another language. And then when people come to us and they know 4 or 5 languages, we don't even provide opportunities for them to use use their language in an academic way, and they lose it. You know, oftentimes they lose it if they're engaged in school. So thank you for that, and we will continue to come back to those important insights. So on the next slide,
I am
sorry, the next slide, sorry. We will each have to do our part to make those visions a reality, like just thinking about how we can take every day, to make steps towards that which we call it the equity equation, but just addressing inequities. And one step towards those visions is building a common language around how we communicate the why in equity and why equity and inclusion strategies in digital learning are good for our institutions and how important they are for the students we serve. So there's a quote by the Koch and Drake did a study in 2018 from the Gardner Institute that speaks to this persistent pattern, and it's on the next slide. There we go. Can I please have a volunteer to read the quote out loud? Anyone that can unmute fastest?
Okay, I'll do it. Oop.
Thank you.
Did somebody else go before me? Okay. Racially minoritized first-gen and Pell Grant students experience higher rates of drop, failure, and withdrawal on average.
Thank you so much, Rob. Our focus in particular in this work is on gateway courses. And those courses that are required for students, as Ray mentioned earlier, to advance into higher level courses in majors play a particularly important role. Failure and withdrawals in gateway courses are critical to access, progression, and completion. We often focus on our graduation rates and our completion rates, but that's just of the students who matriculated through. And when you get into the institutional data and you see there's such great loss, like this quote speaks to, at the beginning, how many students didn't get, enough credits in the first semester? How many didn't, get enough in the second, in the first 2 semesters? It bears so much on our completion rate. So throughout the next few slides, we'll explore a few common barriers to access that institutions have by taking a close look at instructional efforts to remove systemic barriers in their gateway classes. So we're asking ourselves, how can we reframe these courses to embed the equitable teaching practices that Sheila and Heather shared with us, using digital tools and courseware to focus on reducing the DFWI rates in these gateway courses throughout the institution. So at many colleges, gateway coursework is designed to weed out students, and a lot of times you'll talk to faculty and they see their job as, finding the strong students and students that aren't college ready, and just it's a kind of a push out culture that I've seen when I've observed a lot of teaching, and that needs to change. If we want more students to advance into their discipline of interest, reach their social mobility and economic goals, we have to change that narrative, and especially for students who've been historically marginalized by our educational systems, as we were already discussing. So we're going to move into a little data, and I'll give you a moment to digest this slide. So this bar chart shows that in each of these gateway courses, first gen students and Pell Grant recipients that are in blue experience higher DFWI rates than their peers that are noted in green, and the class average, which is in orange. And on the next bar chart, this focuses, provides another level of disaggregated data of two of those courses we just saw on the previous slide. So similarly, as you can see, DFWI rates are higher on average for racially minoritized students, first generation and poverty affected students in these gateway courses. And so it makes one wonder how these gateway courses can be reframed, redesigned, reimagined to serve first generation students and racially minoritized and poverty affected students. So now I'll turn it over to Ray to talk about more about the strategy and solution.
Sorry, folks. Just getting used to my dual monitors. So in this next section, we're going to talk about, since we've centered students, we really want to talk about equitable and accessible teaching practices and what works and why that works. And so when we're thinking about that, we really want to be mindful of the students that we are focusing on. And so over the next few slides, we'll be exploring what happened to students who moved from in-person learning to digital learning. And then we'll consider a case study about how those learnings can be enhanced. And so how do we enhance student learning in those spaces using digital tools, especially as we're continuing to be working remotely and working in digital spaces. And so, Patty, I think we can go to the next slide. So I want you all to just take a look at this data here, and I'll give you some context at what you're looking at. And so this survey was administered to a random national sample of about 1,000 undergraduates who were taking college courses in person. And when the pandemic hit, they finished those courses online. And so the survey asked respondents to choose one of their STEM courses that shifted online to respond to the survey items. The sample size for this survey was over 600 students. The sample is 50% female, 33% of those students were 23 years or older, 54% of the students were white, 22% of those students were Hispanic, 12% were Black, and then we had 12% Asian students. And then 33% of the students came from families with incomes less than $50,000 annually. And so can someone volunteer to describe what you're seeing here? We think about the experience of minoritized students and non-minoritized students as it relates to these questions here, knowing what was expected of you, instructors' knowledge of your strengths and weaknesses, availability to help on course content, feeling included as a member of the class, keeping you interested in the course, and then opportunities to collaborate with other students. So what are you seeing here in this data? Brad, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Ray. Well, yeah, of course, it's showing that minoritized students seemed to have a better experience online than the non-minoritized students. And I immediately wonder if that's related to the instructor not necessarily knowing the ethnicity of the students.
That's a good question, Brad. Heather, did you have something?
Yeah, my comment was similar. It makes me think that the minority students were having a worse time when it was face-to-face. And then when they went online, now they can be anonymous in terms of race a lot of times, and they're maybe feeling less racial bias and things like that because now they can be anonymous.
Yes, Ralph.
Yeah, parallel to what Heather is saying, I've read a little bit about that. And the big word that comes across is microaggressions, that they don't have to deal with the microaggressions in the class all the time, feeling guilty about that, or, how does the Black race feel about, everything. So they don't feel that pressure at all. So they have more of an ability to be themselves, as Heather also underlines, in a digital setting.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Ralph. Brad?
Yeah, just to speculate further, that part of it might be what you all were mentioning a little while ago about varieties of spoken American English, and how the those differences tend to diminish or vanish online.
Yeah, this is definitely something we need to think about and consider. So after seeing this data, how does this resonate with the experiences on your own campuses, and why, or maybe why not? And did you all have these experiences in regards to student outcomes once we went digital and virtual? Has anyone taken a look at their data post-COVID?
I saw some data like this from our university, but I can't remember. I don't know if Mike knows what ours look like. I don't mean to call you out.
I was trying to recall it. I think it is similar, and Justin may have a better handle on it. And I'm not sure he was able to attend today, but I think it looks similar, because we were wrestling with what that meant relative to access to resources, because we know we had some concern with students that when we shifted to remote, their financial position or their housing position made it actually much more difficult for them. But I see Justin here. I don't know, Justin, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, we had a similar data. We were concerned about various components, but we also addressed even the non-academic things to be able to help our students out, to make them also feel comfortable in that shift to remote instruction. So, for example, like on our wellness services side, a lot of our students, especially our minoritized students, started utilizing our counseling services a little bit more. But as you know, once you cross state lines, you have to have that licensure. So, we provided avenues and venues to be able to still provide those other outside services, where if they were struggling in class, we were able to kind of provide services to help out in other ways also. So we were able to kind of address some of those inequities that could potentially exist. So the data that we're seeing here is, as Dr. Steiner said, is pretty close, but I would just take it beyond that and simply saying that the classroom and the social component, I call it the other things, also played a role in that remote instruction and the questions that are posed. And we were able to address those pieces as well, which also led to a little bit more satisfaction and whatnot with our students, and feeling included, and the knowledge and different things like that.
So
Thanks,
one of the things that shaped that feedback for both minoritized and non-minoritized students that we're kind of wrestling with is that we know that even our campus-based students want more delivery options, and not necessarily for a whole course, but within a single course, they want to be able to come to class when they want to, or be remote when they want to. And so we had a feeling in some sense that students were pitching in to drive the decision-making in that regard by way of their responses. In other words, C will do better if you give us the option of attending when we want. So it's very difficult to pull out of that data what the meaning really is.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Mike. We'll take one more response. Renee, you had a question?
Actually, more of a comment. At Lehman College, we have 81% of our students are minority, right? So Hispanic and Black. And what we have looked at in our what I call COVID cohorts is that there's a lot of learning loss that took place in underserved community high schools. And that's where we're drawing our population. So one of the things that we've been able to do is to put an over $1 million investment on what we call learning recovery, which speaks to exactly this: gateway courses, online pedagogy, social workers, because there's a big psychological, psychosocial component to it, and wraparound services with mentors, and online services, because that's where some of our students want to be. When we talk about outcomes of the class, it is a general, although 80% of our students are Black and Hispanic, all of the incoming cohorts are suffering from just basic how to look at the syllabus, right? How to learn, because for a good part of their critical time in high school, their learning has been interrupted. So while I think students feel comfortable about remote instruction, I don't know about you guys, but some of our students are doing remote instruction while they're working, while they're on the bus, while they're in the bathroom of their apartment, because that's the only way they could get access to peace and quiet. So there's a lot of challenges and a lot to unpack when we look at minoritized students and how they're learning in the classroom.
No, thank you, Renee. You asked a good question in the chat. Were these correlated with grades? This is the student's impression, but then it's how well did you do that semester? And I know, when we were analyzing this data, this is studies from Digital Promise, but we didn't collect grade data in that semester because it was so different. The grading policies, you couldn't compare them to those, the prior spring, because a lot of times people had like no fail or everyone gets an A, and so yeah, it's important to look at both of those. How do you feel, and then how did you do? And how is that served? So thank you for that. But we're going to get into a little bit of the effect of some of the digital teaching with the digital tools and courseware here in this next case study. The Oregon State University study focuses on how educators can use digital tools to improve course completion rates in gateway courses. And so this is a case study of OSU's developmental math course redesign. And the case provides an overview of the problem, solution, and strategy here on the next slide. And I'll give you a moment to read these to yourself. How they framed it and what they did about it. So so let's see how this group of educators address the problem. So in this study, faculty used adaptive courseware to redesign their courses. And this image shows how instructors at OSU structured their week using adaptive courseware features. They used Alex, this was developmental math. And they started with prep assignments early in the week, and then practicing low stakes formative assignments. Students then use adaptive courseware for practice until leading up to their summative assessment at the end of the week. So with Alex, instructors were able to identify concepts that students were struggling with and intervene accordingly and adjust their, how much and what they practice. So if you can just take a moment to reflect when you think about your teaching and your teaching at your institution, what pieces of this cycle are present and which are missing from your courses, and just thinking about how big of a role does prior knowledge and formative assessment play in instruction at your institution. Anyone want to share their reaction to this cycle of the learning process? Does this resonate? How much does it align with how you structure your instruction? Neil?
I guess my first response was, gee, I wish I had that software. And that's not a dig at Brad in any way, but I would say that I teach a class that's in sequence, and it's a very important class for students. If they don't have the foundational material during the first semester, the second semester is going to be very difficult. And if they don't do well in this class, they won't pass their credentialing exam. So I have started incorporating low stakes assessments to sort of get them so that I can really assess where they are currently and whether they've mastered some of the previous material. And they found that very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? I agree. The courseware does provide some of that, so it's not all on the faculty member to develop those and then also grade all of those, which I know I would have found very helpful when I was in the classroom.
I think I'm not currently teaching in the classroom, but I do know administratively I've seen a lot more low stakes assessment when Northwest went to an early grade report. So a end of fourth week grade report rather than simply midterm. And that drove a lot of lower stakes assessment early, which has been very helpful.
Definitely. I think it's a two-way street, really. It's, the student gets feedback on where they are and early and often, hopefully, and then faculty can figure out who is ready to speed up and who needs more support. So I definitely am glad to hear that, Mike, that formative assessment had, that change increased formative assessment. So after experiencing this learning process, these were the quotes of how students felt about the changes. So you can see they responded to the, just feeling like their confidence level and then the supports that were available. And if on the next slide, you can see that this chart shows an impressive decrease in the DFWI rates for marginalized students. I had the same question Renee had about going to online. Okay, so they felt good about it, but what did it make a difference and how they did? And so this shows that at Oregon State they were able to significantly reduce the DFWI rates in the developmental courses, developmental math and psychology. So, and you can see on the next slide, I know this is a lot of data to take in quickly, but you will have these PowerPoints to refer back to, but you can also see how their course redesign, really did work to close the DFWI gaps in gateway psychology courses for poverty affected students, and through that analysis of that disaggregated data. Brad?
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. I'm wondering, do we have any sense of correlation with the sort of satisfaction data we saw before? Was the satisfaction related to the introduction of this adaptive learning software, or was it related to some of the other sort of social dynamic things we were speculating on? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great question. That you have access to the study, you can go a little deeper, but I think it was both and, right? And more importantly than the software, because you can't just turn the software on and think it's going to make any difference. It was the teaching practices that you see how they implemented it, to increase the formative assessment. I think that's what students and students were responded to, and that's clear, and that's throughout that study, that it was the redesign of the learning process, the use of the adaptive courseware as a tool that supported the redesign, and all those being aligned, I think really is what made a difference. And it has, through the student quotes, students resonate and respond to different aspects of that, but they mention, they mention the tool, the benefits of the tool and the teaching. And that's really what our one of our main key points here is, it has to, any use of any courseware, any digital tool, it has to be aligned with the best teaching practices and student-centered, evidence-based, however you want to call it, high impact teaching practices, that work alongside of it. So thank you for that question. Now Ray will look at the benefits at the institutional level for scaling equitable digital learning. Ray's trying to find that mute button, aren't you?
Sorry about that, folks. My apologies. And so when we think about the return on investment, we're going to talk about how when we incorporate these digital tools into our practices, we really begin to see how we can cut those costs for the institution, and institutions then being able to use that funding to support student success. So digital learning includes a lot of different opportunities in regards to the range, the content, communications. You have curriculum modules, you have design strategies, and then student support services that personalize instruction for students in blended, hybrid, and online learning. And so equitable digital learning adapts instruction to student needs. When implemented well, this has the potential to facilitate active learning, while providing instructors with data that can inform their design of teaching and instructional practices that lead to improved outcomes for students. And although we know we're doing this work because we care deeply about our students and their success at our college, we need to make a compelling case that strong DEI virtual learning strategies can lead to institutional financial savings and growth in revenue that can be redirected towards improving student outcomes. So in this slide, you'll see that we have 4 ways that strategic thinking, can you go back, Norma? Sorry. Thank you. 4 ways to improve the return on investment for institutions. What are your thoughts about this as you take a look at these? So we have these deliveries improve graduation rates. They help students earn their degrees in less time and enter the workforce faster. They improve access, and then they improve institutional revenue. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's an expectation that using adaptive software like ALEX takes the place of in-person faculty instruction in a way that saves money. And I think that that's a falsehood. Not only is the faculty there, but when we adapted ALEX, we also had student support where they could come in and people be with them as they're going through the different modules, right? So while it does improve institutional revenue, I think we have to be really realistic that the adaptive software also needs to be supported by members of the community to make sure that they're learning in the right way and that they don't get lost.
Thanks, Renee. And so let's take a look at the next slide. And so if you all would just take a moment to review the graph. This table shows how digital learning can help institutions reduce spending per student credit hour. The bottom row demonstrates the differential cost between delivering an online course compared to a face-to-face course. And what you'll notice is that for colleges represented here in the graph, due to reductions in expense like instructional delivery, online learning has generally reduced institutional cost per students per credit. So for example, at TCS, cost per student credit hour is $46 less in the average online course compared to the institutional average. And as these institutions implemented these digital learning tools, cost savings can be achieved in conjunction with positive student outcomes. Yes, Brad.
Thank you. Just to note that this, for me, raises a huge sort of institutional culture issue, which is especially, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to faculty, but especially out here in California, where faculty unions are very strong, this raises all kinds of red flags for them about paying online instructors less per course, raising size of classes so that fewer instructors are needed, a shift in instruction modes so that fewer tenure line faculty are needed. And it can be very threatening, for faculty. And sometimes those feelings are at odds with what's best for our students. So thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Other thoughts?
No, and I think that's really important, Brad. And going back to what Renee was saying, we have to educate folk that this does not replace faculty by any means, and actually puts more focus on professional learning. And I know through our adaptive courseware integration work has really provided a great opportunity for faculty to start talking to each other about teaching. Like that's been one of our greatest benefits. And because when you're talking about how we use this courseware, it shouldn't be, it's a team sport is what we've decided, what we call it. You don't do this one faculty at a time and think we can do it well. The sharing the best practices, sharing, even how you do the settings, so that students don't get stuck in remedial loops, and then and how you bring in other modalities of sharing the information. It just kind of takes a veil off of a lot of the teaching practices that are just the teaching processes that faculty really benefit from just discussing, and also just like Renee mentioned, putting that money into student supports. So like if a lot of people use Alex for developmental math, then you end up having that Emporium model, and you have opportunities and tutors, and where we've trained tutors on the courseware at the same time we were working with faculty, we saw the greatest gains, and making those student affair and academic affair connections. So hopefully our Every Learner Everywhere's work and and research as it gets out to the field will help dispel some of those myths, that because it is intense work of faculty, and we are trying to get more faculty to join in on the work. It is not a replacement for faculty, and I hopefully we will have an opportunity, or unions, I know, like you said, it's scary for unions, but I think, to make sure that they are aware of our work and the findings, and the true faculty experience is really important.
Yeah, and Kentucky Community and Technical College, what they found is that they were able to actually employ more part-time folks because of the cost savings. And so it wasn't replacing those folks, but actually giving those part-time adjunct instructors more classes that they could teach. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. And so there are many things that educators can do to improve equity on campus, but this data points to the value of spending significant time focused on digital learning strategies. So take a moment to review these strategies and general strategies that have proven to make a difference for learners. And then Patty's going to put a handout in the chat, which you all will use as you go into your breakout session.
Oh, and Gail had a question about what's the category of instructional delivery space and faculty pay. And so instructional delivery, Kirsten, correct me if I'm wrong, is faculty, the pay for faculty and teaching assistants. And then the other categories, like student acquisition was marketing. And I'm trying to think of, were there other categories on that grant? I'm sorry, I missed that when that was on there.
Then the online operations is defined as tech management and course development.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot see the additional strategies, whatever's below that. All I have is additional strategies that particularly benefit minoritized students, but there's nothing else below that. Thank you.
Anytime we're ready for the breakout rooms,
Yes.
just let me know.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go into the breakout rooms, and we're going to take about 7 minutes to talk about the strategies that you're looking at and review these strategies and think about how you can implement those at your institution. All right, it looks like we have everyone back. And so we want to give you an opportunity to share out, and then we're going to also talk a little bit about unique obstacles students might be facing in particular courses. And so let's hear from you all. What were your discussions? How did your discussions go? Yes, Brad.
I'll take the liberty of sharing what David said, which was, this is wonderful. It's evidence shows it's effective, but how do we get faculty to learn it and practice it? What leverage do we have? It's that old question of, how do we get especially tenured faculty to teach better and to be open to new tools that can be more effective than their current ways of teaching.
Ray, can I take this one?
Sure.
I have ideas. So I know, and we worked with, was it 13 institutions to integrate adaptive courseware, and we had a lot of participation of tenured, faculty, but it was definitely on a volunteer basis. But I think what the on-ramp and the entry point is, let's look at your data, let's look at your course level data, where are your gaps, and then this is one option that you can use to address some of the equity gaps that's at your course level data. If you're not there yet, looking at course level data, that comfort data transparency, you can look at it departmentally, and say we have these gaps, and then this is an approach that we're going to take to address that's going to give us the ability to track disaggregated data and course completion and course experience throughout. So that's kind of how we did it. And then it was really our full-time tenured faculty that developed these course shells and shared it, across. That was kind of our scaling model, is they shared it across the with their peers, and so they became our best ambassadors, saying this helped me, this worked, the students like this, they didn't like this, but that's how we've seen it work. David?
Then I would ask, what was your course level data measuring? Was it measuring DFWI, or was it somehow measuring learning and teaching effectiveness? Because those are usually not evaluated, and faculty are going to find that very intrusive and very threatening. What was the course level data you were looking at?
So we had the benefit of working with a continuous improvement partner. So we were looking at both DFWI rates and student level data on, from students from those courses. And it is threatening if they think the data is going to be used against them, but it's more, for me, it's more about bringing folks into that conversation, that student success conversation. What part does my class, where's my contribution in increasing our retention rates and our student success rates? But yeah, this is not, I don't want to say that this is easy work, and it's really that institutional culture that has to shift, and where people get comfortable looking at, I don't need you to share your data. I just need you to look at your own data through this lens and ask students, how am I doing? Not at the end of the semester, maybe, like a couple times, and know that you can change your teaching accordingly, and that you have that flexibility and space. And for some faculty, you're not going to get them there. You're not. They're going to teach the way that they've been teaching, and but there's others that, and I know when I was in the classroom, I wanted to know more, and I wanted to do better. So, but I found.
Yeah, my concern that I brought up with my group is that a lot of times when there's a new technology, the institution will say, okay, here we go, we're all going to do this new technology. And not only is that a problem for academic freedom sometimes, but also it doesn't take into consideration that this technology might work great in some kinds of classes, but not work so well in others. And when it's just mandated, okay, we're all going to do this now. It just doesn't work if we're not taking into consideration that different classes need different delivery methods and things like that.
Absolutely. It was so important that our teams were like cross-functional and faculty led, because what worked for math did not work for English, did not work for psychology, did not work for economics. You had to find, it had to be aligned with your discipline needs and your curriculum and learning processes. And so at one institution, they would choose different technologies that fit for that specific discipline. Thank you, Heather. I think that's really important. It doesn't work if it's top down. We're all going to use this, and we're all going to, you're mandated to use, this one type of courseware. That definitely does not work.
Yeah, Heather, and I think that speaks to the slide here, that it could create some unique obstacles. And thinking about our courses, what are those obstacles that students are facing, and how do we address those obstacles? But also, how do we begin to use digital tools in a way that's meaningful to the course and to the student? Any final thoughts about the breakout room session? All right, I'm going to hand it over to Rwanda.
Thank you, Ray. So now we're in our home stretch. I'm just really energized by this engagement and conversation. And so in this next part of our session is where we're going to discuss common language that will enable us to work towards our common goal of addressing inequities. So let me wait. I think we need to go to the next slide. There we go. And then the next one. So let me reorient you to where we are in our overall case making agenda. We focused on the why. This is important for student success. And for the second part of our session, today will be focused on defining what it means to create these learning environments that are inclusive and where students can thrive and faculty are equipped and feel supported to make changes to their curriculum and their pedagogy. So we know that you believe in this work because you're here invested but we also know you work inside a much larger context, as we already brought up, union issues and bringing other faculty into this work. So the reality is not all of our colleagues and peers are at the same place of their equity journey, or even that the response to this imperative, this equity imperative, this call for change that I think most of us feel. So throughout our work, we will be asking you to take daily, weekly actions to begin to interrogate your own your practices at your institutions, and begin to feel equipped to advocate for equitable and accessible access to effective teaching, digital learning. And that means you'll need to have ongoing and frequent conversations about equity and race. And we recognize that talking about race and different social identity differences, is important, but we acknowledge it can be difficult and very uncomfortable if you're not used to it. And many institutional leaders and faculty haven't been equipped to do so. We don't know how to talk about race. Most of us haven't been taught to talk about race. And so we avoid it. But if we can't talk about it, then we can't address it. So, this is our effort, is to, we have to do the work to build this muscle. So this short video from Sean Harper from the USC Center for Race and Equity talks about the need to develop our ability to talk about race. And after the video, we'll define key terms related to how we can directly and intentionally acknowledge race and other differences, and in service of being more equitable in our teaching and at our institutions.
A surprising number of college presidents still pull me aside when I'm on their campuses or when I'm in private meetings advising them on racial equity. They pull me aside and they will ask, is it Black or African American? Or is it Latino or Latinx? And it's almost always in a whisper, which I can perhaps understand why those might be uncomfortable questions for a white president, for instance, to ask out loud. But every single time that happens, and it happens a lot, it does make me wonder, like, if you can't ask that kind of question aloud, what other kinds of questions might you have about race that you're unwilling to say or pose? And I get it, right? Like, white presidents, most especially, don't want to appear naive on race. And even worse, they definitely don't want to appear racist. So therefore, they're just reluctant to raise race questions. Our stance at the USC Race and Equity Center is that you absolutely cannot lead on racial equity if you don't know how to talk about race. And the overwhelming majority of higher education leaders, not just presidents, but also other senior leaders, don't know how to talk about race. They're scared to death of approaching it, largely out of inexperience.
And this is so important, because when we talk about making data-driven decisions, we're looking at the data, but we can't say, hey, our African-American males are, or our Latino females are, Latina females are experiencing, higher DFW rates. Or, it's like we have to. It's so important that we build that muscle in order to do this work. I can't express that enough. anyway, we can talk more about going, how we're often color mute and we talk all around it. And it's really, really hard for us to center race, even with people who have been doing this work a long time. It's just, we have to lean into that discomfort and get comfortable with each other in our safe spaces to ask the questions that we are, afraid to ask. I started that in the beginning, and to speak and question our own practices. So at the heart of when we think about equity and inclusion, both require addressing what students need and providing intentional support to ensure full participation and success. So on the next slide, we're going to take a few moments to review these definitions, and there's a handout that will be put in the chat if it hasn't already, or I think it's in that Google Doc list that gives you these definitions if you don't want to look at them on the screen. So I'll just give you a few moments to look over these terms. So anyone who knows me or has attended any of my workshops knows how important I think it is to understand these concepts and how, how they relate and how they're distinct. I think we often, especially in higher ed, but we often use these terms interchangeably instead of aligning our strategic institutional goals with the correct concept and measures, right? Because we it's like we're DEI, DIA. It's like we lump them together, and so but they're different, and they're all necessary, and they build on each other. But if your goal is diversity, you're going to do something different than if your goal is equity, right? You need diversity to have equity, and to work towards inclusion. To provide access. So, they're all interrelated in interesting ways. So I'm wondering if anyone can share how they could perceive of these concepts as different and their relationship of these concepts. Thank you, Brad.
Rhonda, thank you. May I just touch on something else first, which is obvious to everyone, that this discussion is in the context of a national culture war it just grows more unbelievable every day, of legislatures in some states passing laws against discourse in schools that make white children feel bad, and all this kind of thing, which is part of the larger insanity of what's going on in our country. So sorry, if I'm offending anyone on with any of that. And then just also to note, on the other hand, the people that are doing all that, they have the perception on the other side that these are that this is rampant and out of control and punitive if you don't get it right. So of course, everybody knows all this. I just wanted to point out the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate you amplifying and making sure we're all thinking about doing the reality of doing this work now is very different than a year ago and definitely 2 years ago. So that does not go unrecognized. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. How these words that were once empowering are now being seen as divisive, and institutional leaders have to defend their right or to even address these concepts is sad and terrifying and dangerous in so many ways. But it's expected. Every time we make gains, there's a backlash. And so I think we have to be armed to work through this. And I'm hoping our educational leaders will start speaking back to the I don't know, the CRT trolls is what I call them. In meaningful ways, and taking a stand. And institutions need to take, when I say institutions, organizations, nonprofits, like we all need to band together and support, because I think it's like they're louder than us right now. It seems like they're louder than us. They're getting, I live in Virginia, we just elected a governor based on CRT, so I am not and I'm fighting to get Black history taught in the schools. So it's like it just astounds me. So when we think, it's important to note that, there's, in addition to the crazy political climate that we are in, but there's also, a few misconceptions when we think about diversity and inclusion. And as I mentioned, inclusion can exist in a community without equity, but diversity efforts alone do not create inclusive environments. I feel like in a lot of ways, we got stuck in the 80s and 90s with diversity. And then now we're trying to move folks to that equity, the equity perspective. And it's a shift. It's a shift. So here we have two concepts, diversity and inclusion. We're going to start here. And I'd like to challenge you to think about some examples of diversity and examples of inclusion in your teaching, or even in your institutional structures if you're not in the classroom. And then I'll just ask folks to share out an example of diversity in higher ed, and then we'll move on to an example of inclusion, just to make sure we are talking on, speaking the same language. You're using the language the same way. Does anyone have an example of something they've done or seen that amplified diversity in the classroom?
Heather?
In my classes, I start off the term talking about dialects, and we watch this documentary called Do You Speak American? And it talks a lot about different dialects. And I have them read a couple of academic essays that are published in academic journals that are written in African American vernacular English. And so we talk a lot about how there's a lot of different ways to write and speak, and we focus a lot on how different dialects are equally valuable and all sorts of things like that.
That's a great example. And I would even argue that gets you to inclusion, because you're pulling in different perspectives and supporting that sense of belonging, that, I see you and you belong here. That's a powerful example. Thank you. Does anyone have another example for inclusion or diversity?
Yeah, I do. I'm in the English department at Lehman College, even though English is not my field. But about 2 years ago, the department received a letter from its Latinx students, and they were complaining that they would like the curriculum redesigned to include more Latinx kinds of authors in all of the courses. And so the following year, the English department actually completely rewrote their curriculum with the intention of adding and emphasizing in the appropriate courses more Latinx authors. And we're constantly getting emails about how to look at the diverse authors, et cetera, in our classes. So that was the whole department that did that.
Thank you, Ralph. That is a wonderful example. And that's what I say, this is a team sport. Like, you don't want every faculty member going and, trying to revise their curriculum and bring in different authors and readings when we all can, work together and to look at the curriculum and make it more culturally responsive. And, it's the authors that we use, it's the examples that we teach, that we use in class, and I'm excited for like the OER movement and the potential and possibility there to for folks to have access to common to common text. So we're not all, because I know I always scram. Let me bring in this out, but and I was doing it alone. So I really like that whole department approach. So I'm going to end with this quote. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice. Belonging is having that voice be heard. And so that's one way that I think about those differences. And now I'll turn it over to Ray to talk about a little more about what digital learning requires in this equitable approach.
We've discussed many ways that digital learning can enhance and ensure more equitable student outcomes. And you all have also brought up that there might be some potential negative impact if they're not implemented well. And so there's several considerations that are important for institutional leaders to ensure that faculty and students and staff can successfully incorporate this into the classroom. And so one is access to Wi-Fi. And we know that can be a key challenge that prevents students from accessing materials and tools. So institutions need to make sure that they're making available hotspots and devices available for students so that they can use those and have access to Wi-Fi. And we think about, and I think Brad might have brought this up, students not having the knowledge about technology, but also might not having access to a laptop. And so being able to provide those kind of resources to the students is really important. The other piece is considering material cost in both selections and procurement. It's really important to think about that and begin to think about how OER materials can drive down cost as an institutional policy. We really should be incorporating those materials into the cost of tuition. And so thinking about, again, what are we asking students? What financial debt are we asking students to take on? And how do we mitigate that debt for those students? And then thinking about technology support needs. It needs to be accessible and proactive to support students in overcoming obstacles. And if not, what happens is faculty and instructors become technical support specialists. And so again, you all are there for teaching. You should be teaching and not being technical support. And so what things are in place at your institutions that really support students as they really begin to maybe have these technical challenges? It shouldn't be on the instructor to have to deal with that. But again, putting in place resources so that the students are able to access that and be proactive about it. The other piece is to ensure that students and faculty are supported in building digital literacy. And Rwanda spoke a little bit about that. And so how are we creating opportunities for students to even build that digital literacy? Is that something that could happen with student support services? Could that be part of the library? Could that be part of the academic learning centers? And then again, somehow incorporating that into the classroom as well. And then achieving equity in online learning is not just about providing students with access to resources, but again, ensuring that they are set up to succeed through intentional design of teaching. Our digital teaching and learning practices should always be equity-minded. And so I would ask you all, what does equity mean to you? And then share your thoughts in the chat or raise your hand and we can have a discussion about what equity means to you as we think about digital teaching and learning. Yes, Yoon.
Thank you. One aspect of equity in digital learning would be providing multiple means of representation of information. So, for example, in my case, like when I provide, the audio recordings, in the past, podcasting I use, and then I also provide, textual, script. So they have a choice of, reviewing materials, either auditory or textual, or video is same thing too.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts? So when I think of equity, I think of taking active steps, again, active steps to ensure everyone has what they uniquely need to gain access, opportunity, advancement, and fair treatment within institutions, while identifying and eliminating barriers that disenfranchise or discriminate against particular groups of students. And so we're going to take a look at a digital learning example on the next slide. And so when we think about inequity, inequity shows up when institutions do not provide students with resources that they need to access class. And so equality is about all students being provided with embedded support, and all teachers being aware of the barriers and really working hard to achieve fair and equitable outcomes for their students. And so take a moment to review the terminology here on the slides. Over the last decade or more, we've talked about diversity and having diverse student populations at our institutions of higher education. And at this level, we are only considering, when we think about diversity, that really focuses on compositional diversity. And so when we think about these diverse, having a diverse student body, what does that mean for us as an institution? And then how do we move from diversity to inclusion? And so when we move from equity to inclusion, we ensure that students from diverse backgrounds and perspectives are empowered at our colleges. Both are needed, and we really need to take a yes and approach to this work. Yes, we want diversity, but also what comes after that. So let's go to our next slide. So investing in equitable support is more impactful when institutions critically examine their influence on students. So a recent WCET and DETA literature review found the following to be true. And so we found that, my apologies. We found that supports that are made available to students may still place a burden on the students to overcome the inequitable systems they face on a daily basis in order to access those supports. And then we think about, to be more impactful, institutions should first identify the instructions and actions in the outside of the class, in and outside of the classroom, that positively and negatively influence student successes. So how are we assessing our structures and our practices at the institution? And are we incorporating our student voices? And then initiatives such as preparation experiences and modifying courses to integrate digital technologies are shown to have positive impact on success in future courses. And we can go to the next slide, Patty. I mean, Norma. And so as we think about moving from diversity, could I get someone to read this quote here? And you can come off mute and read the quote out loud. So as you see this quote, think about what that looks like at your own institution.
I think Ralph came off mute. Ralph,
Oh,
you
I'm
gonna read
sorry,
for us?
Ralph. I didn't see you. My apologies, Ralph. Ralph, would you mind reading that quote for us?
Hold on, you're on mute now, Ralph. Sorry.
I do that a lot. To move beyond diversifying the student body and supporting students through cultural centers and services, institutions need to identify the institutional structures and actions of individuals at institutions that are influencing the success of students who are racially and ethnically underrepresented in order to change the systems to create greater access and equity.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. This is what I appreciate about this quote is that there's a focus on what's influencing student success for those racially minoritized students and who's doing this work in a way that's meaningful and showing outcomes that improve success for students. And so when we think about going back to our institutions, begin thinking about how is this happening at your institution, who's engaged in this work, and how do you begin to partner with those folks so that we can actually scale this to improve outcomes for your students. So as we wrap up this session, it will be important for you to internalize these definitions and to bring the conversations back to your institutions. Together, we'll improve our ability to make our institutions more equitable when we begin to have these conversations. And so it's really important we start these conversations, but we also have to continue to have the conversations. Rwanda mentioned this earlier as we were talking about definitions. Again, how are we refining these definitions? How are we creating a common understanding of terminology and language? And then how do we learn about equitable practices at other institutions that we might be able to implement at our own institutions? And so how are we partnering not only within our institutions, but across institutions? And this is a great opportunity for you all to do that. Yes, Brad.
Thank you. If this is the right time to ask this, I know here at CSUSB, we have occasionally workshops and posts and things about decolonizing the syllabus. And I wonder, yeah, thank you. I wonder if you can connect what we've been talking about here today to that notion of decolonizing the syllabus. Thank you.
Sure. So I know I've done a lot of work on equitizing the syllabus, and which is kind of related to the decolonizing syllabus, but it's really just that first look at, I find, for faculty to say, how am I structuring this learning experience? And how am I centering the dominant perspective? And how can I decenter the dominant perspective through my readings, my assignments, my rubrics, how I speak about the course and our learning objectives? There's a lot of opportunity. And in that syllabus, which is that traditional document that we just reproduce, and because you're given one and then you make it your own, and it's just an opportunity, I think, to have those conversations, to interrogate, and like what Heather was saying, like remove the barriers in that language that's expressed through that language for students, and make that the equitized syllabus protocol, which I'm more familiar with, it talks about demystifying college, take the colleges out of it, include the resources and supports that are on campus. And so so I think our instructional designer Susan Adams, who's here on the call, would agree that the next step is thinking about when you're redesigning your course, and then you think about how the syllabus kind of portrays that learning process. And if you bring in digital tools, being explicit about what those tools are for and how they're to be used to support the student, not just another thing to do to get the grade. So it's a great opportunity. So no, thank you for bringing that.
And I'll turn it over to Rwanda to close us out.
Thank you, Ray. So yeah, this session has been packed. I know we have given you data and concepts and strategies that would help support, having that the impact of decreasing DFWI rates. And so it's a lot, but we do this all in effort to help us, make the case that digital designing equitable digital learning is worth the work. And we don't, it's a lot of information, and we don't want to overwhelm, but there's like so much we want to share. And we didn't even, as Brad brought up, we didn't even talk about like the political context and all the things. But then, this, we have many sessions together. So I really appreciate you, your contributions. And I just want to ask, we can do this quickly in chat as we close out here. What is your aha moment from this session? Anything that, that was new, or that you want to think about or try that you can take back to your institution, or any takeaways from this session? Just, what did you get from all of this information? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand and come off mute. Thank you, Brad. Minoritized students had a better experience online than non-minoritized students. Yeah, that data was very compelling. Anyone get anything else? That's all. Ralph?
Yeah, Dr. Neil Malik introduced me to this thing called Mentimeter.com and Kahoot.com, which is something that you can use in the classroom. I wasn't aware of that at all in terms of measuring how students are understanding things. Yes.
Yes, definitely. Those are great tools, and students are really responsive to those, and they give you, quick access to where they are, what they're thinking, and what they know. A great tool for quick assessments of prior knowledge. Thank you, Neil.
And Neil shared in the chat different perspectives of his fellow colleagues. Thanks. What are some things that you might take back to your institution?
Ralph, go ahead.
Oddly enough, I'm an adjunct, which I actually love being, but it's always, everybody here, it seems, is like a doctor, professor, and administration, all those kinds of fields, when it's actually adjuncts that do from 50 to 100% of the teaching. You have to find some way to really get the adjuncts involved. You can't just speak to the professorial staff. Some colleges have 25% professorial staff, and art department is 25% full-timers, and you got like 100 adjuncts. How are you going to get that information to them? All right, I think that's really, really important. Like we share in our office, the three of us who are together, but I don't know how to spread it further. I can do it in my class, but I'm not part of the administration, and I think you have to put more of a focus on your adjuncts too. I think I'm the only adjunct, or one of the few adjuncts in this group, which is fine, but that's my thought.
Thank you, Ralph. At Achieving the Dream, we do so much work with engaging adjunct faculty, and it's definitely an imperative, and it's an important goal for every learner everywhere, because you are so right. We work with community colleges where it's 80% of the teaching is done by adjunct faculty. And and I will say that with the integrating adaptive courseware, it created a great opportunity where course shells could be shared with adjunct faculty and in that training. But that does take an investment. You have to do that professional learning, and folks have to be compensated for their time. If they're coming in and learning a new technology, so it's really important. So I thank you for raising that. Okay, so I'm at the last minute. Thank you so much for sharing all of your reflections, ideas. This is, we're in session 3, so we will keep this conversation going. And the next session on February 8th, we'll build on today's learning by exploring equity-minded inclusive teaching practices, enriched learning experiences, and equitable digital learning impact. I ask that you all complete the survey. We always look at the survey results to find out what we can be doing different and better in these action-packed 2-hour sessions. So please complete the survey. Yes, we can provide that link. Sorry, here, and have a wonderful, wonderful. There we go. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. We look forward to seeing you next week, and go out there and change the world.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.